Have you ever wondered why, when we talk about the power of a car, we still use the word horsepower? In a world with jet engines, electric motors, and machines that can lift skyscrapers, why do we still measure power using an animal that's been pulling plows for thousands of years? Today, we're going to dive into the fascinating story of horsepower, where it came from, why it stuck around, and why no other animal got the honor. Before we had engines, factories, or even bicycles, our lives depended on muscle. Human muscle first, but soon, animal muscle became critical. For most of human history, if you needed something heavy moved, or land plowed, or mills turned, you needed animals to do the work. The horse was, without question, the superstar of that world. Strong, relatively fast, obedient, and adaptable to different climates, horses became our partners in labor and transportation. They were everywhere. In the fields, horses pulled plows and helped farmers till more land than they could ever manage by hand. On the roads, they pulled wagons full of goods and carried travelers across great distances. In the cities, horses delivered milk, coal, and fresh produce every morning. They even worked underground in mines, where horses turned wheels and pulled carts in dark, cramped tunnels. By the 18th century, the economy of entire nations ran on horsepower, literally. Without horses, everything moved slower. Work became harder. Progress stalled. But then, something changed. Human beings invented machines that could do the work of many horses without tiring, resting, or eating. Machines that could revolutionize the world, if only people trusted them. And that's where James Watt comes in. James Watt was born in Greenock, Scotland, in 1736. A quiet, curious child, he loved tinkering with things, pulling them apart and rebuilding them to understand how they worked. As he grew, he became a skilled engineer, eventually working on scientific instruments in Glasgow. It was there, in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, that Watt encountered a problem that would define his career and change the course of history. At the time, steam engines already existed. The Newcomen steam engine, for example, was widely used to pump water out of coal mines. But these machines were incredibly inefficient. They burned vast amounts of coal, wasted heat, and broke down constantly. Watt realized that the engine wasted energy because it heated and cooled the same cylinder over and over. He had a simple but brilliant idea. Keep the cylinder hot all the time and cool the steam somewhere else. The invention of the separate condenser made Watt's engines dramatically more efficient, saving coal, saving money, and making steam power practical for far more industries. Now, Watt had a problem of a different kind. He needed to sell his engine. He needed to explain, in simple terms, just how powerful his machine really was. But how do you describe the strength of something that people had never seen before? The answer came from something people knew very well: horses. At that time, horses were the standard unit of heavy labor. Farmers knew how much a horse could plow in a day. Miners knew how much weight a horse could haul. If Watt could explain that his engine could replace a certain number of horses, people would immediately understand the value. But Watt didn't just guess. He studied. He went to coal mines and watched horses at work. He observed ponies walking in circles, pulling a mill wheel attached to a shaft that lifted buckets of coal. He measured how much weight they lifted, how far they walked, and how fast they moved. Based on his experiments and observations, Watt calculated that a good, strong horse could turn a mill wheel with a force of 180 pounds, moving at 2.4 times around the wheel per minute, with a wheel radius of 12 feet. In modern terms, that's about 550 foot-pounds of work per second. And that became the definition of 1 horsepower. Now here's a little secret. Watt's number was actually a little generous. Horses don't sustain that level of work for long periods of time. But Watt had a reason to exaggerate a bit. He wanted people to be impressed. If his engine could produce 2 horsepower, people would understand that it was as powerful as 2 strong horses, at least in theory. So the idea of horsepower took off. It was simple, intuitive, and practical. Farmers, miners, factory owners, Everyone could immediately visualize what it meant. But that brings up the real question. Why horses? Why not other animals? After all, there were other strong animals in use. Oxen were even stronger than horses in many cases, and were commonly used for plowing heavy soil. Donkeys and mules were critical for transport, especially in rough terrain. In parts of Asia and Africa, elephants did heavy lifting work, pulling logs and carrying huge loads. But horses were different. They weren't just strong. They were fast. A horse could pull a wagon at a speed that an ox could never match. They symbolized energy, power, nobility, and speed. All qualities people wanted to associate with their new machines. Imagine if Watt had tried to sell his engine by saying, "It replaces 2 oxen." It wouldn't have sounded nearly as impressive. And elephants? Most people in Europe had never even seen one. It would be like trying to advertise a product today by comparing it to a UFO. Intriguing, but meaningless. Horses were familiar. They were respected. And they were everywhere. So horsepower became the unit. And it stuck. As the Industrial Revolution rolled forward, horsepower became a standard term. Steamships were rated by horsepower. Locomotives boasted of their horsepower. When the automobile was invented, it made perfect sense to continue using the same measure. Even when technology evolved, the idea of horsepower stayed with us. Today, a Bugatti Chiron boasts over 1,500 horsepower. No one actually imagines 1,500 horses dragging a car down the highway, but the term remains powerful. It gives a visceral sense of strength and speed that kilowatts or newtons just don't deliver emotionally. Interestingly, horsepower also adapted across different cultures. In Europe, there's something called metric horsepower, slightly different from the mechanical horsepower Watt defined. In Germany, car specs often list PS, which stands for Pferdestärke, literally, horse strength. And what about electric cars? Tesla, Rivian, and other electric vehicle makers still talk about horsepower when marketing their cars, even though electric motors work differently. That's because horsepower is emotionally charged. People understand it instinctively, in a way they don't immediately grasp with kilowatts or torque curves. Now let's touch on a few fun misconceptions. First, some people think a car with 300 horsepower has 300 horses hidden inside it. Not quite. It means the engine can produce the equivalent amount of work that 300 horses could under Watt's old definition. Second, horses themselves don't constantly output 1 horsepower. In fact, a real horse usually operates at about 0.7 horsepower when working steadily. 1 horsepower is more like a horse's peak output when really straining, like sprinting or pulling a massive load for a short time. Third, not all horsepower ratings are the same. There's brake horsepower, shaft horsepower, wheel horsepower, and more, depending on exactly where and how the engine's power is measured, whether at the crankshaft, at the wheels after drivetrain losses, or during engine tests. Despite all that technical variation, the idea remains simple. Horsepower equals power you can feel. It's a bridge from the mechanical world we live in now, back to the living, breathing creatures that once carried civilization forward. In a way, it's beautiful. Even in our most high-tech, futuristic machines, there's a reminder of the ancient partnership between humans and horses. Every time we talk about horsepower, we're tipping our hats to an animal that shaped history. So next time you hear that a car has 400 horsepower, or you push the gas pedal and feel that surge of energy, think of it. A whole team of horses pulling in spirit, rushing you forward at speeds they could have only dreamed of. And that is why we measure engine power in horsepower. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the surprising history behind everyday things, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for more fascinating stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.